At 24,000 feet over the Pacific, the top of a Boeing 737 tore off in flight. 18 feet of fuselage, from just behind the cockpit back over the first several rows, peeled away into the slipstream. It was April 28, 1988, Aloha Airlines Flight 243, on a short hop between islands in Hawaii. The passengers were suddenly sitting in open air with the ocean below them. One flight attendant, Clarabelle Lansing, was standing in the aisle when the skin let go, and she was swept out of the airplane. She was never found. 94 of the 95 people aboard survived, and the crew somehow put the crippled jet down on Maui, Maui. Everyone remembers the roof. Almost nobody talks about why the cracks that caused it were never caught. Start with the airplane itself. Tail number November 73711 was 19 years old, and it had lived a brutal life. Aloha flew it between the Hawaiian Islands, hopped so short the jet often climbed, cruised for a few minutes, and came right back down. Each of those flights is called a cycle, one pressurization and depressurization of the fuselage. A long-haul jet might fly a handful of cycles a day. This airplane had racked up 89,680 of them. According to the National Transportation Safety Board, that was the second highest cycle count of any 737 in the world at the time. Every one of those cycles inflated and deflated the fuselage like a balloon, and metal that flexes, that many times eventually gives up. The failure started in a part of the airplane most passengers never think about, the lap joint. This is where two sheets of aluminium skin overlap and are fastened together to form the tube of the fuselage. On this generation of 737, Boeing joined those sheets two ways. There were rows of rivets, and there was a cold bond adhesive, a glue meant to spread the pressurization load across the whole seam. The idea was sound. In practice, on many of these early jets, that bond broke down over the years. Moisture crept in, the adhesive disbonded. And once the glue stopped carrying its share of the load, all of that stress transferred onto the rivets and the small holes drilled for them. Here's the dangerous part. When load concentrates at a line of rivet holes, you don't get one big crack. You get dozens of tiny ones, a small fatigue crack starting at hole after hole after hole. The safety board calls this multiple site damage. On its own, each crack is almost too small to see, but the cracks are lined up like a perforation on a sheet of paper. Once enough of them link together, the skin can unzip along the entire row in an instant, faster than the structure can redistribute the pressure. That is the mechanism the NTSB report describes for Aloha 243. Not a single flaw that grew, but a whole population of cracks that stayed invisible until the moment they joined hands. So the obvious question is, where were the inspectors? And this is the part of the story that should stop you. The NTSB looked hard at how Aloha inspected these airplanes, and what they documented was a program badly overmatched by the job. Investigators found that some inspectors had received as little as 2 hours of formal classroom training for the work they were doing. Crucially, they had little to no instruction in nondestructive inspection, the specialized methods, things like eddy-current probes, that can find a crack hiding under paint or under a rivet head before it reaches the surface. Without those techniques, an inspector is largely left looking for what the naked eye can see. And multiple site fatigue damage is precisely the kind of flaw the naked eye cannot see. Now picture the actual task. A single 737 fuselage carries something on the order of 1,300 feet of lap joint, seam after seam running the length of the airplane on both sides. The inspections often happened overnight, so the jet could fly its schedule during the day. That meant a mechanic on a ladder or a stand, in a hangar at night, working a flashlight along seam after seam, hunting for cracks that at their earliest stage are finer than a human hair. Even a skilled, well-rested inspector with good equipment struggles to find early multiple-site damage that way. Ask someone with 2 hours of training and no eddy-current tools to do it, at night, across 1,300 feet, and the cracks were always going to win. There had even been warnings. Boeing had issued service guidance about this exact lap joint problem on high-cycle 737s, and there were airworthiness directives, the FAA's legally binding maintenance orders, aimed at inspecting and fixing these seams. The trouble was that the airplane was accumulating cycles and cracks faster than a visual inspection program could reliably keep up. The safety board's conclusion was blunt about it. This was a system failure, not one careless person. The design was more vulnerable to disbonding than anyone had accounted for. The inspection methods were not matched to the threat, and the training and oversight left the people on the hangar floor set up to miss exactly the flaw that brought the airplane down. Aloha 243 became the birth certificate of a whole new way of thinking about old airplanes. Congress passed the Aviation Safety Research Act of 1988, and the FAA stood up the National Aging Aircraft Research Program to study exactly how fatigue, corrosion, and disbonding accumulate in high-time structures. Mandatory inspections of those 737 lap joints were tightened, and non-destructive inspection moved from a nice-to-have to a backbone of aging aircraft maintenance. The industry stopped assuming an airplane was fine just because it flew yesterday and started treating structural life as something you actively measure and manage. The 2-hour inspector became impossible because the rules now demand real training and real instruments for exactly this work. That's the part worth carrying out of this. The roof coming off looks like a freak event, a one-in-a-million tear in the sky. It wasn't. It was the predictable end of a long chain, thousands of tiny cracks growing cycle by cycle, on an airplane the inspection system was never equipped to see them on. Every aging aircraft rule an A&P mechanic works under today, every eddy current sweep of a high-cycle lap joint traces back to 18 feet of Hawaiian sky and a flight attendant who never came home. The next time you hear an old jet described as a survivor, remember that survival is not luck. It's the inspection nobody used to know how to do.